Just ahead on American Black Journal, the award-winning Tavis Smiley Show makes a stop in Detroit. We'll talk with host Tavis Smiley about his experiences while taping in Detroit, and we'll find out why he chose to place a national spotlight on the city. It's a conversation you don't want to miss, so stay right there. American Black Journal is next.
At DTE Energy, we believe that we have a greater responsibility. We believe that being part of a community means being involved in the fabric of that community, investing time, effort, and resources in the communities we serve. DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of American Black Journal.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. Tavis Smiley is well known to PBS viewers as the host of an award-winning late-night talk show. This past week, Tavis taped 5 episodes of his show before a live audience on the Wayne State University campus. The show topics included the city's downtown rebirth, the challenges faced by longtime Detroit residents, the thriving arts community, and education. I even had the opportunity to share my thoughts about the city as one of his guests. American Black Journal contributor Jennifer White sat down with Tavis to talk about his decision to give viewers across the country an in-depth look at Detroit.
Welcome back to American Black Journal, Tavis.
Thanks for having me back, Jennifer. Good to see you.
So tell me about what brought you to Detroit.
I love the city, as you know. I grew up down the road in Indiana, so as a child, as one of 10 kids, we couldn't really afford family vacation. So our vacation was my parents saving their money and filling up the station wagon with gas and coming to Detroit for the day. So as a child, I came in and out of this city all the time. And then when I went to college at Indiana University, I was on the debate team, and every year there was a huge debate tournament hosted here on the campus of Wayne State where we sit today. So I was here every year for 3 or 4 days for this huge debate tournament. And as a professional, of course, I've been here countless times. Just saw you last year, I think it was.
Yeah.
So I'm here all the time, but this particular trip is meaningful for me because I wanted to, for the national TV audience, for the public television audience, document what's happening in Detroit. I think we all agree now that there's a slow but steady comeback of the city. The city's turning around, but for whom? And how do you make sure that what's happening in downtown becomes a bridge to the rest of the city, and downtown just doesn't become an island unto itself? And there's a lot of good work going on here, but some tough questions that need to be asked. And I wanted to give the national audience a chance to get in on that conversation. And so for 5 nights, we have broadcast our show from Detroit.
It's interesting, as a native of Detroit and someone who still lives in Michigan, I think there's a local narrative, but there's a different national narrative about the city. How do you think those two differ?
It's a very good question. I think that there is a pejorative view that oftentimes exists of Detroit. I think our view can be punitive when we talk about Detroit, what it's gone through for the last few years. And yet, on the flip side, I think that most Americans, whether they know it or not, have a cosmic connection to this city. And I say cosmic because you might not even know that you're connected to the city through the music that this city has produced. Motown, Aretha, Anita, and Eminem, and Kim, and Big Sean, whatever genre you like, Detroit has given it to the world. So we're connected to the city through the music, through the art, through the sports legends. And
through the
certainly
cars.
through the cars. I was coming to that, the cars that we drive. So we all have a connection to this city. So I think that a lot of people may be looking at the city punitively and pejoratively, but there are a lot of other Americans, and I would argue more Americans, who are pulling for this city to see this comeback happen.
When you think about the punitive narrative, what is that rooted in?
Honestly?
Yeah.
Race.
Okay.
We look at Detroit, it's a chocolate city. And we look at this city as we have for years. I mean, this goes back to Coleman Young. We have looked at this city for so many years as a race city. And part of that narrative I accept. I mean, Detroit is the black Mecca. I mean, this, as far as I'm concerned, it's the black Mecca. It's a black Renaissance center. It's given America some of the greatest Americans that we know and celebrate have come out of this great city in every field of human endeavor. And so Detroit it's an amazing city, but too often the city is seen through the lens, through the prism of race, and that can be, as you know, an intractable issue.
As a journalist, we've had lots of people come into the city and do reporting, and at times it almost sounds like a anthropological excursion. You know, we're in the wilds of Detroit. How do you come to Detroit and write a different story, tell a different kind of story?
I think it starts, one, as I said earlier, with my love for the city. Two, I've never lived here, but I've been here so much. I guess I could have been an honorary taxpayer. Don't tell the mayor I said that. But I've been here so many times over the years and stayed here for days and weeks at a time. It starts with being a person of color. So often the journalists who come to this, and I never call myself a journalist per se, if I am, I'm an advocacy journalist. I do have a point of view. But people know what that point of view is. And I think fourthly, I could give you a number of reasons, but the last reason I would offer is that I never come to any city, particularly Detroit, and buy into the narrative that's being written by others.
Okay.
So for example, with all due respect, because I've never met him, he's never done anything to me, but I got some questions about Dan Gilbert. See, for people outside of Detroit, Dan Gilbert is still the same guy who basically, and it's not a quote, we're on public television, I want to get this right. Dan Gilbert is the same guy who basically told LeBron, I own you. When LeBron left Cleveland, go back and read what Dan Gilbert said about LeBron James. He has since apologized for that now that LeBron is back in Cleveland, and LeBron has forgiven him, and I'm all for love and forgiveness and kumbaya. But the Bible says out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. So what does Dan Gilbert really feel about Negroes, and was his issue just with that one Negro who he thought he basically owned in Cleveland? So Dan Gilbert comes to Detroit. This is his hometown, of course. He already owns most of Cleveland. Now he comes to Detroit, another American city. He now owns most of downtown Detroit. And there's some tough questions to be asked no matter what good he has done. And I celebrate the good he's done. I'm glad that somebody has made a wise investment. Let's not act like he hasn't been given a lot of tax breaks, a lot of incentives. He's making a whole lot of money. So it's not like he's doing this just out of the goodness of his heart. He's a businessman, and I ain't mad at him for that either. But there's some tough questions to be asked about what happens when one person has that much control and that much power. When one person controls not just the entrepreneurial base of downtown, or the business base of downtown, but even the security system. This man controls the security system, and the cops want something, they go to Dan Gilbert to get videotape. And other businesses are buying into his model, and so he's controlling the security system. And so it raises some serious questions about whether or not, this is a dangerous thing to say on television in Detroit, but it raises tough questions about whether or not the city might be getting colonized. It raises
that's a strong word. That's a strong word.
I admit that, but here's the question. The question is, what happens if and when your rescuer becomes your captor? What happens if your rescuer eventually starts to hold the city hostage? And I'm just saying, this is a municipality. It's a city.
But everything he's doing with permission now, and with the support of a great number of people who appreciate what he's putting into the city.
I'm one of them. I appreciate it. I'm just saying, but there are questions to be asked.
So the checks and balances part is what you're looking at.
We just can't go blindly into letting somebody own the city. I mean, cities ought not to be the domain of wealthy billionaires. We already have enough of that in our politics as it is. To be elected to anything, you got to be, Michael Bloomberg bought the mayoralty in New York 3 times. And we see examples of that. The United States Senate is bought by millionaires and billionaires who act now as public servants. So my point is that I don't live here, but I love this city. I come here all the time. And I want to just ask the questions that maybe others are a little afraid to ask. I was disappointed in the media here in Detroit. Judge Rhodes, who oversaw the bankruptcy, said to me on our program while here in Detroit, he was stunned that not one media outlet in this city pressed him. No motion was filed to put cameras in that courtroom. He was the largest municipality, the largest bankruptcy in any municipality, the largest bankruptcy of any municipality in the history of this country. And not one local TV network filed a motion to put cameras in that courtroom to show the citizens what was going on every day. How did the New York Times and the Washington Post and LA Times and USA Today and everybody write about this, but nobody had a camera in the courtroom for the citizens to see what was going on? These are questions that have to be asked, and sometimes it takes somebody from the outside to come in and just start a bunch of trouble.
Just stirring stuff up, Tavis. Well, you've been talking to a lot of Detroiters during this trip, and what are you hearing from them?
I'm hearing what I tried to intimate earlier, that people appreciate what Mr. Gilbert and others are doing, but they are concerned, as I am, that downtown doesn't become an island unto itself, that it does in fact become a bridge to the rest of the city. I'm hearing that there's a distinct difference between success and progress. People are saying success, we're not just sure yet whether or not that represents real progress. I'm hearing concerns about whether or not this turnaround will include the long-time residents of this city who ought not to be left out of this. See, I live in Los Angeles, so I've seen this story, Jennifer. I've seen a city where they do everything they can to turn around downtown. We've done that in LA. LA was dead for years, like downtown Detroit was dead. And then we built the Staples Center, so the Lakers are downtown. The Clippers are downtown. We built Disney Hall. We got a great concert hall downtown. And then the condominiums started going up. And then the restaurants came in, and the businesses came in. So downtown LA now is all that and then some. And just down the road in South Central, where my office lives, people are still struggling, trying to turn it around. So I don't come to Detroit, trying to proselytize, but this is a story that I've lived. I'm a business owner in LA. I have a company. I have a building that we built and own in the heart of South Central Los Angeles. That's where the Smiley Group is headquartered. That's where my TV shows and radio shows, everything comes out of that building on Crenshaw. So I'm invested in my own African-American community in South Los Angeles. So I know this story a little bit, and I just want to make sure that what happened in LA doesn't happen in Detroit.
It's been interesting. A lot of people talk about rebirth, the rebirth of Detroit, and that implies that something died. And I think for long-term residents of the city, people who have lived here, raised families, started business, maintained businesses, that idea that something died hits them in a negative space because we've been here the whole time. We've been here. Have you heard from those people? What are they saying?
I've heard that sentiment expressed, and when I hear the word rebirth, I sense some of that. But I think it is also fair to say, though, that something did die. What has died, a slow death, is the tax base. I mean, that can't be denied. The tax base has slowly, died, or certainly, if not dead, it's been on life support.
And
so we have to do something about that tax base. And that's why I said I don't want to be, it might come across that way, I don't want to be too harsh on Mr. Gilbert particularly. But I'm just concerned that, that there isn't 1, 2, or 3 people who get to run the victory lap a few months down the road, a few years down the road, and for the rest of the city, we're still struggling. For example, I knew I couldn't come to Detroit for an entire week and not spend an entire show, talking about education. If we cannot figure out how to fix Detroit public schools, you got 60, 70 districts in one city, I don't even understand how that works to begin with. But I understand a little bit better now, but still doesn't make any sense to me. It's complicated, right? But we got to turn around the school system. And we had an entire show about education. I know that in a matter of days, the governor's committee has already or is about to release its report about what they think ought to happen to the schools in Detroit. But you're on your 4th emergency manager in 6 years here in the city. I've done my homework, and I've been coming here a lot of years, so I've seen a lot of this. But this comeback ultimately means nothing long term if we can't fix the education crisis, catastrophe, quite frankly. It's more than a crisis, it's catastrophe right now. When you've got less than a 25% high school graduation rate, we're on the campus of Wayne State. How does a great university like this survive in a city where you don't even have folks graduating high school? Who's going to sit in the classrooms at Wayne State? What's the future of Wayne State and other institutions around here? So these, again, are legitimate questions that need to be asked. And let me buttonhole it this way. This is not just about Detroit. Let me just be selfish for a second. This is also a cautionary tale for the rest of America. And one of the reasons for bringing cameras to Detroit for the national audience is because maybe there are some lessons that we can learn. Maybe there are some best practices, some good policies that are being put forth in this city to help turn around Detroit that might work in other places. Now, the flip side of that is that in Chicago, just down the road from here, everybody looks at Detroit. Just back to an earlier question you asked about how people view Detroit. We talked about it being punitive and pejorative sometimes, this prism through which we see the great city of Detroit. So Chicago's never going to get demonized the way Detroit is.
Why?
Because it's Chicago. It's Chicago, and it's not Detroit. But Chicago is in the same situation in terms of teetering on bankruptcy. They cannot fund their pension program for their employees. The city has a huge budget shortfall. Rahm Emanuel is running for mayor, and black folk in Chicago are mad at Rahm Emanuel, and he's begging for black folk to vote for him, and whether he wins or doesn't win depends on what the turnout's going to be. Chicago is in a perilous situation right now. And I said to Judge Rhodes in our conversation, I asked him how fearful he was that cities will start to do what Detroit did. I understand the Detroit situation, but what happens when other cities, Jennifer, start using Chapter 9 bankruptcy as a way to avoid paying the pensions of their employees? Because Judge Rhodes made a decision based upon the law as he saw it that pensions are not protected. So if other cities now look at that precedent set by Judge Rhodes and start doing the same thing, you're going to tell me that cities all around the country where black people have been working oftentimes for the local governments for years, now have their pensions cut because cities have now see that as a strategic tool to avoid paying their pensions? I mean, there are questions that we can learn, questions to be asked, and I hope lessons to be learned from what Detroit's going through that might help the nation. Y'all might be doing us a favor.
But do you think people will actually listen? Because again, I think Detroit is viewed in a bit of a bubble on the national scene. It's, well, they had the big three, and the automotives failed, and they got the there's this whole narrative around Detroit that makes it seem like a little special snowflake over there, and it can't happen in other places. So will people listen to some of the lessons that can come out of this city?
I hope so. What I learned a long time ago in the role that I play, and this is the only thing that keeps me halfway sane, is that all I am responsible for is sowing seeds. I'm just a seed sower. I think that public television, at its best, challenges folk to re-examine the assumptions they hold. At your best, at my best, what we do is to help people expand the inventory of ideas. At our best, we introduce Americans to each other and challenge them to see the world through a different prism, a different way. That's what we do at our best. But at the end of the day, all we're doing is sowing seeds. And you hope those seeds will plant themselves and they will grow. But I believe that information is power, that knowledge is power. And so as long as I have a public TV and a public radio platform, as long as I have a voice, I'm trying to ask those tough questions. And sometimes it gets me in trouble. It gets me in trouble when people don't like you asking tough questions of their black president. But you got to ask those questions anyway. You come to Detroit and you ask tough questions. Some folk don't want to hear that, but you got to ask these questions. And I think that's what our role is, to put these questions on the table. Don't be mad at me for asking. I'm not the mayor. I'm just a guy on TV asking questions that I think we ought to at least consider. But I think the country can benefit from that if we listen. Whether or not we do, I don't know.
So you've been asking a lot of questions while you've been here. Have you heard answers?
I have. I've heard some things that I think make sense. I think the city is going to have to figure out, and I've heard some interesting ideas from the residents. The city's going to have to figure out how to deal with these water cutoffs. See, this is what I mean. You got everybody, you know, pumping up Dan Gilbert and others, turning around downtown, and 77 new restaurants and 44 new businesses in downtown, 7.2 mile area, just since 2013. That's a beautiful thing. But just down the road, you got folk whose water's being cut off. And we hit summer in a couple of months. I mean, I've been reading this, and I'm seeing it. I talked to the mayor about it. There are a whole lot of folk lined up right now, or in line to have their water cut off in just a matter of weeks from now. How is it that you're celebrating a renaissance in downtown, but folk are having the water turned off? Poverty is real in this city.
Well, and that seems to highlight one of the big questions coming out of the bankruptcy is this emergence of a new Detroit and the balance of, for lack of a better term, old Detroit, right? And so you have the formation of a very prosperous class in Detroit, but there's this other group of people.
It's that same tale of two cities that people talk about.
Exactly, they don't see themselves in the future of new Detroit.
And that's why I said that. That's why I said where solutions are concerned. Your question on what I've heard, why not tie water bills to income? One solution that might address that crisis. But I've heard a lot of good ideas that I think can be implemented. Part of the problem too is that so often the people who have the most to offer are solicited the least for their opinions. You know, I went to the Detroit School of Arts while I was here. Love those kids at that school. A lot of talent over there. And before I sat to tape this show of all these brilliant educators in Detroit who are in charge of fixing the school system, I said, let me go talk to the people who matter most, the students. And the best ideas I heard, I ain't trying to call no names, but the best ideas I heard came from the students. You'd be amazed at what I heard from the students at the Detroit School of Arts about what they would do if they were in charge of the school system to fix some of what's wrong with the school system. So sometimes you got to ask the right people if you want to get the right answers. And I think there are a lot of long-term residents of this city. I don't know how well they're being consulted. I'm concerned about whether or not there are African-American entrepreneurs. And I feel I'm ambivalent about this. Let me just put both points out.
Okay.
On the one hand, Jennifer, I'm concerned about whether or not there are African-American entrepreneurs who've been given the same kinds of incentives and tax breaks and other kinds of opportunities that other folk have been given to invest money in downtown and beyond. So what are we doing? How aggressively are we working with African-American entrepreneurs to help bring this city back and to make money in the process like everybody else is doing. That's number one. The flip side of that, which I hope to talk about more while I'm here, is why these bourgeois elite Negroes who had money in Detroit haven't acted more proactively in the years past. Why does Dan Gilbert or anybody else get a wide open lane? Now again, most of us ain't got Dan Gilbert money, so I understand that.
I certainly don't.
I certainly don't. We both on public television, so you don't get rich doing this.
You don't.
We barely eat. I can't speak for you, but anyway. But it does raise a question as to for those African American elite in the city, for those who've had money. I'm just curious, and I'm sure there's an answer to this. I don't know this answer. I'm just asking questions. But why didn't that class? Why don't I see more of their money being put to work? Why don't I see more of that kind of development taking place? Maybe it's out there and I just don't know it.
Oh, I think some people would argue that it's partially the media's fault in the way we tell stories about Detroit and who ends up on the front page and whose picture ends up in a paper when it's about redevelopment. So if you find an answer to that, call me and let me know, because I'd be curious to hear. But I think that's part of what you'll hear, is that people don't tell those stories.
You just raised another point that I have found fascinating, and I've heard this over and over and over again on this trip, which didn't surprise me because I've heard this narrative for the 25 years I've been coming to Detroit. I've heard this narrative since the Coleman Young days. There are a lot of people in this town, here again I'll get myself in trouble, there are a lot of people in this town who think that the media in this town are not really for this town. There are a whole lot of folk who I talk to who think the media.
And that's a big umbrella, because under media you're talking television, radio, print.
It is, but I'm talking mainstream. That the mainstream media loves churning out these stories, but are they really for the city in the way that everyday people are for? I go back to the point about the fact that nobody even asked to put a camera in the courtroom. And again, Judge Rhodes himself said, I was stunned, Tavis. And he said furthermore, that I was ready to rule, and I would have ruled in the affirmative. That yes, bring the cameras in, because he said, I believe the citizens deserve to see this. Nobody asked. So what's that say about the media that they didn't put cameras in there? And yet when Kwame Kilpatrick is on trial, you couldn't get down the sidewalk for all the media trucks. You couldn't get it. Citizens couldn't get in the courtroom for all the seats being taken up by media people up and down the streets of Detroit. So you cover the trial of the guy who you say helped put you into bankruptcy. But then when the bankruptcy proceeding happens, nobody cares enough to fight to get a camera in the courtroom to cover it. See, these are tough questions.
As we wrap up here, as you've been listening to stories about Detroit and talking to people, what gives you hope about Detroit's future?
The people, the thing that's always given me hope. We close where we began, with my being a child, and in that station wagon with my 9 brothers and sisters, and my mama, and my daddy, and my grandmama. The reason why we came to Detroit when I was a kid so often to visit is because it gave me hope. It allowed me to see a world outside of that I knew. I can't begin to tell you what joy I had when I left the cornfields of Indiana every so often to come to a city like Detroit and to see the auto industry and to see black folk living in nice homes. I'm living in a 3-bedroom trailer with 13 people. But in Detroit, these Negroes have houses, and they have nice cars, and they have good jobs, and they've got good music, and they've got great restaurants, and there's families here for generations, and there's hope in the air. I could feel that hope. The love in the hearts of these citizens, the hope in their souls, their positive outlook about their future. I could sense all that even as a child. So coming to the Mecca did something for me. So that same hope and inspiration that I had then that drove my aspiration is the same hope I have today. It's all about the people. This city is full of resilient people. And if the people have anything to say about it, Detroit's coming back.
So I hope that in a year or two, or maybe annually, that you'll come back, because I think that national spotlight, that understanding of what redevelopment means, not just in terms of economic development, but in terms of what happens to the people in a city, I think that's a story that needs to be told. I hope you come back and that you keep an eye on what's happening here.
You ain't got to beg me to come to Detroit. I'm always looking for an excuse to come to Detroit. It's a great city with a great story that I think is going to be regarded for years and years and years in the history of American politics, how this city went down and came back up. And it's an inspiring story, and I hope to continue tracking it.
Last question,
Sure.
Any surprises?
Surprises. I'm surprised that my friend Judge Damon Keith, at the age of 93, is still as strong and as vital and as vibrant and as bright as he is. I love coming to this city to see him,
Yeah.
because he's such an American icon. I was glad that while we were in town, we had a chance to spend an entire show in tribute to him and to give him the kind of national spotlight that he deserves. So I just get inspired by being in his presence. So I always surprised that as he gets older, he continues to, that drive is just amazing to me. I hope that if I make it to 93, I'll have the kind of spring in my step that Judge Keith does.
Well, Tavis, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Delight's always mine. Thank
Glad
you,
that you're here, and hopefully we'll see you back sooner rather than later.
I look forward to it.
All right.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks for being here for ABJ.
My pleasure.
That's our program for today. Thanks for watching. You can get more information about Tavis Smiley at AmericanBlackJournal.org. And as always, you can connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. Plus, you can hear our program on WDET 1019 FM. We'll see you next time.
At DTE Energy, we believe that we have a greater responsibility. We believe that being part of a community means being involved in the fabric of that community, investing time, effort, and resources in the communities we serve. DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of American Black Journal.